This is really interesting. I wanted to do an analysis of this Japanese roundtable and discuss some of the things they talk about. So there was a couple of roundtables that they did at the summit, and they basically just gathered up some players and asked them some questions. Like asked them some questions, and also just to get their thoughts on some stuff. Like they did one with the U.S. players, and they did one with the Japanese players. I thought was super interesting.
As well?
Almost as interesting as Shadow Assassin's suggestion to analyze the serial tier list, which I will look at next. Actually, you bring up a good point. All right, so let's check this out. This luckily has subtitles, so it doesn't really matter how loud I keep it. Oh, what was the question? Sorry. What makes Japanese and Western players different? I think that's this is an interesting point that Dogra brings up, right? Most players tend to play aggressive in Dragon Ball, and I think that this is an interesting point to bring up because it's rare that you see people who are not like that. I think like exceptions are like people like him and Chris, probably Chris G. The amount of mistakes.
日本人はミスを少なくしようと努めてる多分一応で海外勢はミスっても勝ちゃいいでしょっていう
This is an interesting question, or an interesting answer to this question, right? Like Dogra kind of elaborates on it more after this, but this to me is such an interesting like way to think about the differences between playstyles, right? Is that Japanese players are focused on making less mistakes, right? Their goal is to make as few mistakes as possible, right? Because in the long term, that kind of thinking is what allows you to win like more consistently, right? Lower the amount of mistakes you can make on each like whatever, and like you'll improve over time. That's kind of the idea. American players, he says on the other hand, are okay with making mistakes as long as they win. Well, you bring up a point. You say like Dogra got smoked at the summit, right? But you can just kind of look at the way that what he mentions here and like his thought process is kind of like that's okay to him, right? Because in Dogra's mind, it's not about winning today or tomorrow or whenever, right? Like that, the goal is to like more consistently win in the long term, which is an interesting way to think about stuff, right? I think that that's kind of an interesting thing that they said, because if you think about how people started playing Dragon Ball in the West, that makes a lot of sense.
いずれ多分そのプレイヤー数の関係上アメリカの方が強くなるんじゃないかなとは個人的には思う。なるほど。今はあれやね。アルカプとかそうやったんだけど、最終的にはそうそうやっぱりアメリカの方がまあレベル高いですよっていう。そうなんです。だから多分俺はドラゴンボール。
I don't know if I think this is true. I think that's interesting though. This is funny to me. This is actually super funny to me. The strongest character discussion. This is so funny, right? Because this this is such a funny like difference because they all said Kid Buu, and then this started an argument in the house that between the best characters, and there was two sides of this argument. It was like Civil War all over again. Like Sonic Fox and a bunch of people were like, what do you mean? Cell is the best character. And then all the Cell players were like, what do you mean? Like Kid Buu is the best character. And they got into this big argument. And I walked into the room when there was like 6 or 7 people arguing, and I was like, well, I have a question for you guys. Right? I was like, well, I have a question for you guys. Like, if you think Cell is the best character, right? Who do you think is the second best character? And they were all like, oh, Kid Buu. And I was like, okay, if you think Kid Buu is the best character, who do you think is the second best character? And they were all like, Cell. And I was like, all right, well, then this doesn't matter at all, does it? It really doesn't matter. What's more interesting is like the 3rd through the 5th or something, right? I think out of all of them, he's the newest to being a player, right? So his answer is interesting.
みたいな反響があったりとかっていう環境をものにやっぱ受ける立場なのかなっていうのは思ってて、まあそれが嫌かいいかっていうのは別に考えてはないんですけど、 評価される立場なんやなと思いました。
激しいことは言えなくなったよね。いや普通に
Laughs in Japanese.
激しいことはできなくなったし、激しいことも言えなくなった。
Yeah, the perception that you have to be the perception that you have to be more tight-lipped or not as outspoken is interesting.
やってたけども、そんなに今ほどやってなくて、プロになってからやっぱりそれは仕事になってから週6でも平気でやるようになって、で大会とかも昔はそういう感じでやってたから、ちょっとエンジョイ気分で出てたのもあるんですけど、やっぱり一番変わったのはその大会での仕事感っていうのはやっぱり自分にはできたなっていう。
Yeah, the added pressure to win, right? Reynolds? Yeah, what about Reynolds? Yeah. The immense pressure of being let go by my team. Oof.
勝たなくてもいいだろ。いや、
思ったことを素直に言えなくなったの。
Fucking Dogra says, who cares if you don't win? He said, man, who cares if you don't win? Everything will be alright. You know, there are more responsibilities to a player than just winning. That is true, though. Right? Dogra knows that it's true, right? That's interesting. But he's right. There's a lot more to being a top player or a sponsored player than that. Yeah, this one came up twice, huh? Not being able to speak your mind. And others get to say whatever they want? Hell no. Maybe it's even more strict in Japan, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, maybe the lack of acceptance it hurts a little bit. I will likely get flamed. Yeah, I've heard. That's interesting. I've heard that. What's it called? I've heard that Japanese stream monsters are so much more rude. Or like Japanese like Twitter monsters or like forum monsters are even more rude. I need a laughs in Japanese down here again. That was interesting. I watched this the first time, but I wanted to talk about that on my stream. The cereal debate is actually going to stress me out if I watch it.